You've been told that money is just paper, but for most of history, it was so much more. It was a promise, a tangible link to something real and valuable, gold. But what if that promise was broken overnight? What if the entire global financial system was secretly re-engineered to benefit one nation above all others, setting the stage for decades of inflation, debt, and financial chaos? Today, we'll uncover the untold story of why America abandoned the gold standard, a decision that changed the world forever. But before we dive in, if you enjoy videos that expose the hidden mechanics of money and power, make sure you subscribe because we have a lot to unravel together. And tell me in the comments, which country are you watching from, and what time of day is it where you are right now? I'm curious to see how far this conversation reaches. Let's start with a question. Why is it that for centuries, money held its value, but today, your savings seem to lose purchasing power every single year? The answer isn't just about spending or bad luck. It's about a single event, a moment in 1971 when the very definition of money was changed by one man, President Richard Nixon. This decision, known as the Nixon Shock, severed the U.S. dollar's last tie to gold and launched the era of modern fiat currency we live in today. It was a move that protected American dominance, but unleashed a new kind of economic instability on the world. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind and look at what money used to be. For most of its history, America's money was backed by gold. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture, it was a hard rule. The gold standard meant that every dollar in circulation was, in theory, a claim check for a specific amount of physical gold held securely in the U.S. government's vaults. This system acted as a powerful anchor. It instilled discipline in governments because they couldn't just print money out of thin air. Their currency creation was limited by the amount of gold they actually possessed. This direct link to a finite precious metal kept inflation naturally low and fostered immense global trust in the U.S. dollar. The world saw the dollar as being as good as gold because, well, it was. This stability was the bedrock of the Bretton Woods system, an international agreement established after World War II that made the U.S. dollar the world's primary reserve currency, with all other major currencies pegged to it. But by the late 1960s, the golden promise was beginning to tarnish. America found itself trapped in a perfect storm of its own making, drowning in financial pressures that threatened to shatter the system. The Vietnam War was a colossal drain on the nation's treasury, a conflict that cost billions upon billions of dollars with no end in sight. Back home, President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs, while ambitious and socially transformative, represented a massive expansion of government spending. America was trying to finance both guns and butter, and the only way to do it was to print more and more dollars. This flood of new money pouring into the economy had a predictable consequence, a growing trade deficit. For the first time in the 20th century, the United States was importing more than it was exporting. American consumers were buying foreign goods with freshly printed dollars, and those dollars were accumulating in the central banks of countries like France, Germany, and Japan. These nations looked at their growing piles of U.S. paper and started to get nervous. They remembered the rules of the Bretton Woods Agreement. They had the right to exchange those dollars for America's gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. And that's exactly what they started to do. Foreign countries, led by an increasingly skeptical France under Charles de Gaulle, began demanding gold in exchange for their dollar reserves. They saw the writing on the wall. The U.S. had printed far more dollars than it could ever back with its gold reserves. The system was a house of cards, and everyone was rushing to cash in their chips before it collapsed. The United States was facing a classic bank run, but on a global scale. Its legendary gold vaults at Fort Knox were being steadily depleted. The U.S. was caught in a trap. It had promised the world its dollars were as good as gold, but it had created so many dollars that the promise was now impossible to keep. The system was breaking. So, on a quiet Sunday evening, August 15th, 1971, the world changed forever. President Richard Nixon appeared on national television to deliver what is now famously called the Nixon Shock. In a speech broadcast to a stunned nation and an even more stunned world, he announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. This was the moment the music stopped. The gold window, the mechanism that had underpinned the global financial system for nearly 3 decades, was slammed shut. With that single act, Nixon effectively ended the gold standard, severed the dollar's final link to anything tangible, and ushered in the modern era of fiat money. The temporary suspension, of course, became permanent. The implications of this decision were monumental, and they rippled across the globe almost instantly. The first and most profound change was that the US dollar was no longer tied to gold. Overnight, it transformed into a fiat currency. The word fiat comes from Latin, meaning, let it be done by decree. A fiat currency has value simply because a government declares that it does, and it is backed by nothing more than trust in that government's stability and ability to manage its economy. The dollar was no longer a claim on a physical asset. It was a paper promise, backed only by the full faith and credit of the United States. This fundamentally altered the nature of money itself. With the dollar no longer anchored to gold, global trade and finance were thrown into a new, uncharted territory. The fixed exchange rates of the Bretton Woods system disintegrated. Currencies that were once pegged to the dollar were now allowed to float freely against one another, their values determined by supply and demand in the open market. This created a new world of currency speculation, volatility, and risk that hadn't existed before. International business suddenly became a lot more complicated. More importantly, breaking the link to gold unleashed governments and central banks from their last restraint. Without the discipline of a finite gold supply, they were free to print as much money as they wanted to fund deficits, stimulate economies, or bail out failing industries. This opened the door to a new economic paradigm, one dominated by inflation and debt-based growth. Instead of relying on production and savings, economies could now be propped up by credit creation and monetary expansion. This gave rise to the boom and bust cycles, asset bubbles, and chronic inflation that have come to define modern capitalism. But what was the hidden motive behind such a drastic move? Publicly, Nixon sold the decision as a necessary step to protect the dollar from international speculators and stabilize the American economy. But the untold story is one of power and strategic self-interest. By ending gold convertibility, the U.S. protected its dominance in world trade and finance. It was a geopolitical masterstroke. The U.S. could now pay for its imports in foreign wars with dollars that it could create at will, while other countries had no choice but to accept them. This is often referred to as the dollar's exorbitant privilege. The rest of the world had to produce real goods and services to earn dollars, while America could simply print them. This cemented the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, not because it was backed by gold, but because the global system was now addicted to it. The final outcome of this story is the world we live in now. The decision made on that August night in 1971 set in motion the forces that have shaped our economy for the last 50 years. The slow but steady erosion of purchasing power, the explosion of national and consumer debt, and the recurring cycle of financial bubbles and crashes can all trace their roots back to this single event. The world was promised stability, but it was given a system built on ever-expanding debt and trust in paper promises. When America broke its tie with gold, it also broke the old rules of money, and the world has been paying the price ever since.